this is it. My one weekend of proper track time I do with my dad every year. This just so happened to be the inaugural year of the Edmonton Speedway revival, so it was also the largest grid of vintage race cars I've seen since I started racing. The Group B category, which I was in, was huge. We had a good mix of classic Alfa Romeos and Volvos, a Trans Am Boss 302 Mustang and a Trans Am Camaro, no-nonsense Mini Cooper and Ford Escort, plus many other cars, and then there's me and my dad in our similarly equipped Mustangs. So, my dad's Mustang and mine. I'll give you a rundown on both of them. They aren't identical, but very similar. My dad's 72 Coupe was his first car. He's owned it since he was 16. It has a small block 302 4-barrel, and it's a 4-speed transmission. Now mine, I've owned since 2010. It's a 73 Mustang Mach 1, also 302 4-barrel 4-speed. Both are lowered 1 inch and stiffer springs in the front, but that's the end of the similarities. My car, being the Mach 1, has the much quicker steering ratio with the Shagon steering box, and I have stiffer Shelby-style sway bars front and rear. My engine came from a $240 donor car, which we sold for $200 after pulling the engine, so a $40 engine. And then we added an Edelbrock Performer 289 intake and 4-rail carb to it. The rest of what may or may not have been done to the engine is a mystery. All we know is it pulls quite good considering what we put into it. My dad's engine is a little bit more serious. The factory heads are swapped out for the freer flowing 351 Windsor heads. It has a hotter cam, and it's topped with an Edelbrock Torker 289 intake and 4-rail carb. We're both running street tires and stock brakes. That's something to improve on in the future when it's in the budget. So for now, we're back markers on the grid. Now, my dad and I are always in really close competition, but ever since he dropped in his new engine, his car pulls away from me at every straightaway. However, I can usually make up some time in the corners. Last year was probably our closest race to date. I managed to have better lap times, but he still beat me in track position every time last year. I just couldn't stay in front. Now, at the revival weekend, my dad did have some engine trouble and sat a few sessions out. But after some investigating, there wasn't enough evidence of something really wrong at the moment to really justify not racing. He was hardly down in power, and we were still neck and neck on the track, so my dad returned for the final few races, which is what I was really hoping for. Alright, this is it, the big one. My dad and I were qualified in the mid to rear portion of the grid, me just one position ahead of him. I had the outside line going off the start, but I played it a little bit too cautious going into turn 1. I lost out in track position to my dad, and the Triumph GP6 slipped through and fell between my dad and I as well. Like I said earlier, my dad and I are typically back markers on the grid, but behind us there were a handful of cars because they had missed the qualifying race prior to this race. So I had a bunch of faster cars breathing down my neck, including that Trans Am Camaro, all while I was trying to keep up with the Triumph tailing my dad. So I had a camera mounted on my car for this race, but for some reason it didn't record. So I didn't catch any of the mayhem going on between me and the Triumph. My dad put a couple tires off the track, which picked up some dirt, held them up a little bit, and the 68 Camaro took this as an opportunity to make a couple moves. He managed to slip between myself and the Triumph. Then only a few turns later, he overtook the Triumph, and immediately after, he blew a front tire and had to pull off the track out of the way. It was a bit dicey, but man, it was exciting. Unfortunately, no footage to show it, so you'll just have to take my word for it. I was slowly gaining ground on the Triumph, trailing my dad for multiple laps. The only point where any of us were ever close to pass one another was at the west end of the track, which was still under yellow flag for the Camaro, so no passing there. Once the yellow had lifted, the Triumph finally made its move and slipped past my dad, and that's when I knew I had to start planning my attack. I made up some ground on the final chicane and tucked in behind my dad, looking for an opportunity to get by. We dove into turn 1, and coming out of turn 2, I took the late apex. My dad ran a little bit wide, so I had a little bit of extra momentum leading into turn 3. I made it, but the race isn't over until it's over. Now it was time to play defense. Some of the lead cars now lapping us back markers helped make a gap between my dad and I. I was holding my lead, but each lap my dad made back a little bit of extra ground between us, taking advantage of his extra horsepower in the straights. He also managed to smoke the bug right dead center of the camera lens too. Final lap. My dad's still pushing hard. He was gaining on me, and I knew it. I saw him peeking down the inside line every once in a while, looking for any opportunity to get by. I was definitely feeling the pressure. The race nearing its end, I'm still ahead, pushing hard to keep him behind. I got a bit sideways entering turn 10, but I held on to it and brought the car back into a straight line, but I lost a little pace. My dad took a chance to dive in entering the chicane, but there was just not quite enough room for him to get by. It wasn't our closest finish, but it was still a race right down to the last corner. These are the races my dad and I are always hoping to have every time we're at the track together. It was incredibly fun, and I can't wait for next time. Now, I'd love to credit my small victory based on my driving that day, but it became apparent that there was something else that aided me in beating my dad. The engine troubles I mentioned earlier that my dad was suspecting, they are in fact very real, and he was definitely down on horsepower, despite being a little faster than me in the straightaways still. On the drive home, my dad's water temperature spiked, so we pulled over. The coolant was down, the crankcase over full, the oil was water contaminated and aerated. All the signs are pointing to head gasket troubles. At this point, it was about 2 weeks before we had to head south to Nevada for the Silver State Classic Challenge, so the issue needed to be resolved quickly. But more on that next episode. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And if you haven't already, check out our last video from the Speedway Revival weekend. It'll give you a better overview of what the revival is all about, and features some incredible vintage race cars. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm going to get busy on the next episode. It's going to be a big one. I can't wait to share the adventure with you. It's going to be amazing. I'll see you then.